Good evening. With Sarah on the way out, who should lead the next phase of Canterbury's recovery? We'll discuss this tonight, and Lynched starts right now. Good evening, thank you for joining us. So the Canterbury Earthquake Recovery Authority is supposed to be closing down, but is it? Well, you may have heard about the government's new plan to create Regenerate Christchurch, but is this just Sarah or the CCDU dressed up in drag? Well, who would really know? Over the weekend, Dion Swiggs, the director of the charity organisation Rebuild Christchurch, took me on a tour of the city. Now, we didn't speak to government officials, they've had their say. We spoke to residents on the ground, some still doing it tough.
We're heading out to Parklands and we're going to have a look at some of the how the recovery is going out there at the moment. With Sarah winding up in a couple of months next year, we need to look at what's going to be happening, who's leading the city. Well, with only a couple of days left to get the transition plan and the consultation out of the way, I just want us to go and have a look at actually what East Christchurch looks like.
You haven't won lotto, Seth. Hi, I'm Chris. Nice to meet you, John.
G'day. John, do you feel a part of the recovery here?
No. We need the footpaths fixed and we need the roads fixed, but they can't do that till they get the sewerage system fixed, and we don't know when the sewerage system's going to be fixed. So we just wait and we wait. We hear a hell of a lot about the CDB, but we have no plans at all about here. If there's a plan, we've been saying this ever since we first started and all of this work 4 years ago, been asking to see a plan. If you knew what was going to be happening, you could take it, you know. Can they not fix the places up for the kids and then argue about who's going to be paying for what? You know, we're dealing with people.
Well, how do you feel about the recovery and how it's going in Christchurch so far since the earthquakes?
Really slow.
I feel like it could be better.
Yeah.
Well, what could be better?
There's so much of Christchurch that could already be fixed, but they've been focusing on other things that aren't entirely important, like the flag. Spending so much money on a flag that doesn't really need to be changed when they could be putting it in for all of the brokenness in the city.
As young people, there needs to be more stuff to do. Just more places for young people to go.
So how do you feel about one person still has the ability to have overall say or change the decisions of the city over 5 years?
It's more like a dictatorship.
Who should run the city? Seriously.
The community.
Why do you say communities?
Because we've lived through the earthquake and we've lived through the recovery period, and we know what Christchurch used to be and what it should be in the future.
One of the hardest things at the moment, Chris, is people going through their repairs and their rebuilds, especially in East Christchurch here. We've got so many people that are waiting for their houses to rebuild.
Do you reckon there's still actually a massive demand on decent housing in Christchurch?
There's a huge demand.
I've actually got a friend, Dion, who I think's family member actually lives at that camping ground in New Brighton that they want to close down at one stage.
What we've found here is, as a result from the earthquake, is that people, because insurance has taken so long to settle, 4 years or so, that people have been forced to come here and stay in a camp where they would not have chosen to do that first time off.
That's sad.
It's really sad. It's really, really sad. For us, we've made a conscious choice and we've adapted to that and we love it, and we'll fight tooth and nail in order to save that. One of my fears would be having to go out into the market, try and find a place that I can't afford. If you're going to prioritise massive stadiums, massive convention centres that cost the community a hell of a lot more money than what they generate, again, it defies logic. Surely you go back to the basics. What are the basic needs that people need?
We don't know so much about what's going on in the central city. I mean, there's buildings sitting up here that we don't know. We get told what the plans are. We just get told.
Hi, I'm Chris. Nice to meet you.
Johnny, how's it going?
G'day, Johnny, how are you? So Johnny, how are things going here in the central city?
I think things are just taking a lot longer than anyone thought was going to happen. So it's just that it's dragging on, it's time. I know a number of people who have had a crack at small business and it's just too hard. And it's there's a bunch of rules and regulations out there that just make it tough every step of the way.
They can't be bothered with the fight anymore.
I can feel that, I've thought about giving up recently.
Do you think things like Regenerate Christchurch or this government intervention over 5 years is going to help or hinder you?
I was one of those people after the earthquakes that said, what an opportunity, and I just now find myself worrying that those opportunities have been missed. I think it's just a standard old rebuild of a city, and it seems to just be a case of rich guys helping out other rich guys to get richer, and meanwhile Joe Public gets no say in it.
But aren't you supposed to be the beneficiary of some of these massive projects? Because there's the old argument, Johnny, that build and they will come.
Yeah, but knock down and not build and nothing happens. I'm still involved with EQC with my house. I've got nothing happening there. Every day I'm fighting with someone or other with my business, and I think if I didn't have good support structure around me, I would have given up and just left.
So what do you think of what you've seen today?
I feel like people are exhausted, they're frustrated, but they're actually they still want to have a say in the future of the city.
And it's really easy for people to have a say. I mean, there's an Action Station website where you can have a say, and it takes about 4 minutes to have your voice heard.
People power does work, so have your say. And the cameraman on that story was award-winning Christchurch-based documentary maker Gerard Smythe, and sound by Paul Skelton. So, a locally led recovery, is it possible? And why is it important for you at home to make a submission to the government? Well, here's the thing. Remember Victoria Square and that drama? You had your say, and it was people power that actually worked. So what do you need to know at home about this proposal? Joining me tonight is Dion Swiggs again from Rebuild Christchurch and Evan Smith from Eastern Vision. Good evening to you, gentlemen. Dion, let me get to you first. What was your reaction to what you saw, what we toured through in the CBD and the eastern suburbs? Were you surprised?
They're tired. People are so worn out, they're knackered. And this is really hard for a lot of people to grasp, this whole transition. What does it mean to people? And this is a failure, I believe, from the government. They haven't actually explained what's actually going on. People, as I said, are drawn out, but they do want to have a say. They want to be a part of this recovery. They want to be a part of the future. And there's a sense of optimism there that needs to be captured by local people who are here. And the people who are in touch with the locals in the city are generally the local council.
But I want to play devil's advocate with you for one moment though. Others would suggest we still need government support. What are you suggesting? Chuck out the government support and let Christchurch pop up with what?
No, I don't think that's the actual answer. There's a lot of money that still needs to be spent, obviously, from the government, such as anchor projects and all those other things. But there needs to be more coordination, and there needs to be an actual true partnership between the council, the government and the people of Christchurch. At the moment, there isn't.
OK, when we return, we want to discuss that partnership. With Earthquake Recovery Minister Jerry Brownlee still having the powers over 5 years to veto any decision by the council. Is that true democracy, and is that a true partnership? That's next. Welcome back to Lynched on CTV. So Sarah, the Canterbury Earthquake Recovery Authority is supposed to be on the way out. What replaces that? Well, apparently Regenerate Christchurch. What on earth does that mean? And why should you at home care? Joining me tonight is Dion Swiggs from Rebuild Christchurch and Evan Smith from Eastern Vision. Evan, let me start with you. What is your interpretation of Regenerate Christchurch? Because I think people at home need to understand what this proposed organisation is all about and how it will possibly help the residents if in fact it will do that.
My understanding of it is that it's a commercially driven organisation that's basically centred around the redevelopment or the regeneration of the central CBD in Christchurch. It may have an advisory role, advising the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet on what's happening or proposals for the red zone in terms of some technical advice. But as I read the statement at the moment, that Regenerate Christchurch is primarily focused on the CBD.
OK, Dion Swiggs doesn't sound that bad at all.
No, and this is actually what they're still discussing. Is this plan that's been told us, they actually haven't worked out and fleshed out the full details. I think from what I understand is the council want the whole Regenerate Christchurch, which will be focused on the central city, about the regeneration, the rebuild of what's actually happening there. But the council want that to have a bit more further say in the whole city. So that actually has a board that would advise it as well, that sits above it.
So hang
there's
on,
not one
wouldn't
minister.
Regenerate Christchurch be good then if that's just focused on, so by the sounds of it, this is the CCGU in drag. Really, this is still going to be focused on the anchor projects because nobody is suggesting let's get the government out of here. So we need that. But what is obviously that's not locally led because we need some sort of government cash, right? So the main concerns we have are what? Explain that to people at home.
So I think one of the main concerns is that the transition plan, the document that's been released, has no say around what's going to happen to the future use of such as the red zone in Christchurch and some of these other things around the communities. It's so focused on the commercial failures, or it talks about the commercial failures in the CBD and the city of the rebuild being due to not having the commercial interest from developers and investors. Well, why is that? Have they made a vision about what's going on in this city? Are they talking to the communities in Christchurch? Are they engaging the whole city as a whole, or are they just looking at it as isolated entities around the city? And that's one of the big things that I really would like to see, is that if Regenerate Christchurch does become the next thing in this regeneration bill that's created out of where we're going, it does need to focus on the entire city. It needs to have a board between that minister who, at this stage, under still the cabinet papers, will have for the next 5 years overarching veto on everything that the council does or anything that anybody does. He could just go, I don't like that, and change it. That's a big problem.
But if the central city has been a great failure, and you only have to look in the central city to see it has been, in terms of what's been created, we are very fortunate to have decent private developers in the city, there's no doubt about it. But one could argue the CCDU's been an absolute failure. So would it concern you then to know that there'll be some of the same staff members on Regenerate Christchurch? So what is the point of it? This is a name change.
That is something that actually does concern us, and from everybody that I've been speaking to, especially from local council and everywhere else, they don't want to see that. And the thing is, Sarah will wind down. That Sarah is ending at the end of April 2016 next year. From there, what's going to happen? And this is, but we're ending this consultation period where we have a say about what's going to happen or what we think should happen. But we've got between now and when it maybe go to select committee to actually really flesh those things out as a city. What do we actually want to see? And those developers, and then it goes to select committee, and then the bill has to go through Parliament. So at that stage, as a city, we need to say to all of the politicians or the people that are actually making this bill, what do we want as a city?
Evan Smith, in your view, after reading this proposal, what's in it for the red zone? Who's going to be running that? Is it the government? Is it the council? Who?
It depends what you call by running it. In terms of interim management of the land, that's going across to a government department, Lynched.
Is that a good or a bad thing?
I think somebody needs to manage that while decisions are being made. However, there's all sorts of provisions in there for central government to be able to to prevent access to the lands, continue to prevent access to those lands.
I know that's important. Now that's the distinction I think we're after, isn't it? Because why? And why should central government have any control over the red zone areas?
I can understand why they want some input into the decision-making process because they've invested a lot of money buying people out of those lands. However, it's our backyards, it's our neighbourhood. Why should a faceless bureaucrat in Wellington tell us when we can go on those lands? We've been locked out of those lands. We've been locked out of our own recovery in our own neighbourhoods. It's really important that people are able to go back onto those lands and have access to them. It's also really important that the proposals for the legal framework are that the government can sell those lands, subdivide them, amalgamate them, do what they want with those lands without any provisions for community consultation on any of that.
Dion, is even being too angry by suggesting a faceless bureaucrat from Wellington being able to have some decision making over the red zone areas of Christchurch, or do you share his concern?
I share that concern, and this is the big concern, especially when we went out to the suburbs and spoke to people in our city. They don't know who's making these decisions. They don't understand. And this is where there needs to be a little bit more communication about what's going on. And this is why I think Sarah should have actually just sort of sucked it up and gone, you know what? We're making this transition plan. Let's have some consultation. Let's meet the planners, or let's meet the people who actually made that plan so that they can talk to us, talk to the people who are concerned about our city and tell us what it actually means. Because it's all legal speak. There's all sorts of terms in there that most people that read this plan don't actually understand.
That's the problem, isn't it? I think that's what we try to achieve over the weekend, Dion, is the fact that it is important for people to have their say, regardless of whether they understand the document or not. Just have your say, whether you want a locally led recovery, whether you still want government intervention. It is important for everybody to have their say, but as you and I both came across, although people are exhausted, they still want a massive say in their city, don't they?
Yeah, they really do. And as we just said before, it's just really hard to understand. It really is, and it really is important.
You're concerned also over the fact that Earthquake Recovery Minister Jerry Brownlee still has veto powers for 5 years. Is that because he doesn't trust the council, or is he just making sure, as perhaps Evan said in a roundabout way, that he wants to make sure that everything's going to be going okay from a government point of view? After all, the government could easily argue, we've invested billions of dollars, we're not pulling out now, we still want some power.
The solution here, I believe, is there needs to be some sort of powers. There will need to be some things that are changed in the next 5 years around plans or you know, anything to do with recovery. You know, things need to happen pretty quickly sometimes. And so that's why that's in there. But they actually, instead of having one person to hold that power, if you look at it, you know, have two keys to the lockbox, so to speak. So maybe it's the mayor at the time and the minister of whatever organisation, who both can come together and agree on maybe, well, we need to get this plan changed or something like that to quickly accelerate something.
Evan, I'm going to give you the golden key. You can decide whatever you like. Do you like the idea of a locally led recovery? Do you like the idea of government still having a greater say over Christchurch? What do you want?
I think central government and local government both need to be parties to that decision-making process, but the decisions need to lie within the communities that are directly affected by it. So it needs to be the people that make those decisions in partnership with government, whether it's local or central government. What's happened out in the east and through a lot of Christchurch is that people have lost confidence in the insurance industry, they've lost confidence in central government, they've lost confidence in local government. The only people they can depend upon is themselves. They need to be involved in these decisions right from the word go.
And that's sad, isn't it, though, because not just from a central government point of view, from a council point of view, people would probably argue that they've got no say anyway now. So what are we playing at here, you know?
We need to revisit how decisions are made in the recovery.
Got to take a break. When we return, we'll discuss what's going on in the east. When we're out there, it still looks like a basket case. Is there hope, and what do we do about it? That's next. Dion Swiggs and Evan Smith are my guests tonight. Evan, let's get to the heart of the issue when it comes to your community group. You represent Eastern Vision. You represent many people that are still doing it tough in the east side of Christchurch. Do they want a voice? Are they frustrated? Are they tired? And would they want to be involved, to be honest, in recovery this and recovery that when they're just trying to live day to day?
I think they'd like to say on when their houses are going to be fixed. They'd like to say on when their roads are going to be fixed, and they'd like to say on what's happening in their neighbourhoods. For so long, those decisions and the transparency around those decisions has been taken away from people. As I said before, people are locked out of the lands that adjoin them, their properties, and they're locked out of the recovery.
Let's focus it a bit. You say that the recovery needs to be led by local communities. Can you give me an example of exactly what you mean by that, though?
Okay. Decisions with regard to the red zone land. There's been 5 years now since the initial earthquakes, and there's been a lot of ideas come out of communities about what could be done in the red zone lands. But there's been no opportunity to discuss that as a community with government, with local government or central government. It's really important that debate happens across the board as much as possible. Share an idea was a good way to start that kind of conversation, but it was a one-off, one-shot wonder. It needs to be a process, an iterative process that takes time.
That's a fair comment. Dion, is it unkind or kind to suggest that Sarah has doubled its staff, as we saw in that report in the press, of recent months, yet this is an organisation that's winding down, plus it's an organisation that doesn't seem too keen on publicising the fact there's a submission that ends at the end of this week?
Well, what do you hear out of them? We have not spoken to Sarah's staff for almost a year and a half because they just refused to engage with us because we didn't do what they wanted to do. And it's really sad. And this is happening right across the city, especially when it comes to communities and people that don't sort of make them feel good about what they're trying to do. So there is some truth into that. Again, you know, recovery is a really complex thing. It's really difficult. There's so many moving parts to what is actually happening. And unfortunately, the government's focus has been on the fiscal recovery. Really, how much money are they going to make on this and how much money can they get back for what they're investing?
But has it really though? Because they've had no business cases, so maybe it hasn't been on fiscal...
Well, that's probably why nothing's happened. That's probably why there's not the conventions that have started to build, because they're going, well, how can we make money on if we're going to build that? We've bought all the land, how are we going to make money back on that? Or how is it going to limit the Crown's expenditure? All those kind of questions. You know, they spent $22 million almost on just trying to make a plan for the convention centre, and it's still a dust bowl out there.
Now imagine if $22 million was spent on fixing the bloody roads on the east, is all I can say.
Well, that's a good point, but just again, small businesses, invest those into small businesses. We spoke to Johnny Moore from Smash Palace. He's struggling. He can't get people to come into the business because the roads are all up in arms. Yes, they need to be fixed, but there's not really great coordination apparent from what he was telling us around how many different roads are closed and all those things. Yes, good progress is happening there. But while that's happening, there needs to be support for these small businesses because they're the heart of what's going to happen in the city.
Oddly enough, when we went for our tour, tiki tour if you like, in central Christchurch, and good on Johnny Moore who owns Smash Palace for remaining or at least trying to be able to be out that way, I don't see many other small to medium-sized businesses being able to do that. Is Johnny Moore right when he told us that it's too hard, they're exhausted? Should the city have been allowed to have grown organically as opposed to this and this?
Well, I know from my perspective and my personal involvement with the recovery over the last 5 years, we've had heaps of small business people coming to us with ideas and saying, how can we get this off the ground? And they go and talk to Sarah, and then they come back to us, or they go and talk to the government, they come back to us and they say, look, it's just too hard, there's no support there. And again, there seems to be a feeling that if it's not going to make a return on investment for the government, they're not really that interested. And that's why I think if the council or there was a more partnership with a local recovery, then there would be places where they could go that they could find that support, because it's in our own interest as a city to have those small businesses to thrive.
Okay, Evan Smith, nothing wrong with a government that wants to make money. You would call that fiscally responsible. But is there a sense from your communities that not enough is being done, or the priority is up the wazoo?
You've got to look at it from more than a single bottom line. Commercial disciplines, fine. You need to make ensure that the balance sheet evens out at the end of the day. But there's also the social recovery, the environmental recovery, the cultural recovery. All of those impact on the economic recovery. You can't have one without the other. You can't look at this from a Treasury perspective at a single bottom line. It's got to be right across the board, comprehensive. Can I just tell you one thing that's in the transition plan that they recognise that is based on international research, and they make the statement, for recovery to be sustainable, it needs to be owned and led by local communities and institutions. They say that, but they've never ever implemented it anywhere in this last 5 years in the recovery. It's time they started doing that.
Dion?
I agree. Have we seen it? Yes, in small places maybe, but really when there's such a lot of people complaining and you know, rightly so, that this isn't happening, you've got to listen. And we listen to those people, and even the young people are feeling it. You know, they're feeling disenfranchised from the recovery as well. And, you know, they had great ideas.
Some final moments. Evan Smith, how do you get those on the east to remain engaged? Because I'm getting a sense they are tired and they're worried that if they have their say, it's pointless. How are we going to get people at home, regardless of what political leanings you have, to get engaged, to either email the Sarah website people or to email the Action Station website? How are you going to get them to be engaged? What messages would you have for them tonight?
It's very hard. It's very challenging because people are disengaged. People have no faith in the processes anymore. I would suggest certainly tell government that you do care about what's happening in your neighbourhood. So submit, doesn't matter what it says, but let them know that you care enough to submit something. But when it comes down to it, unless people are actually able to influence decision-making processes, they're going to be totally disengaged. They're going to be totally disempowered. That they need to have some positive signs of some small wins at least, that what they have asked for actually is happening on the ground.
Speaking of a small win too, Evan and Dion, Victoria Square. People got up in arms and said, don't touch our square, it's the only thing we recognise as being pre-earthquake, leave it alone. Sarah went, oops, whoops, okay, we're listening, we'll do some tweaks, but we're not going to change anything. So the message there, Dion, is that people power does work.
Exactly. Victoria Square is actually probably the best example of how your voice can be heard and how it actually can change the thought process of this government. And I think that the outcome has been fantastic for Victoria Square. If we can do this for the entire recovery, and again, it's a really hard thing to visualise, but if we can do that, we can engage our communities, we can empower them to actually just say something. Just show you care.
And the thing is, if people don't have their say, then they can't moan at election. They can't moan, they can't ring me up and moan saying nothing's being done. If they didn't bother to have a submission, you've got no right to complain, is my words. Dion Swiggs from Rebuild Christchurch and Evan Smith from Eastern Vision, thank you, gentlemen, for coming to talk to us tonight. And that is our program. Don't forget, if you want to be engaged in the process, if you want to have a say in the future of your city, head to the CERA website or their Action website as well. We'll pop both details on Dion Swiggs' Facebook page at facebook.com/Rebuild Christchurch or my Facebook page as well. Don't forget to join me for News Talks of E tomorrow, starting from 8:35. Once again, Christchurch Mayor Leanne Dalzell is the weekly guest, but from all of us here at CTV News, have a good night.